All right, welcome again to Collecting Elton. My last episode was a Captain Fantastic vinyl deep dive. I looked at each one of the vinyl copies I have in my collection in honor of the 50th anniversary of the album, which is today, May 19th, the day I'm taping this. I wanted to do that, and I also wanted to do a separate episode doing a deep dive of the CD copies that I have. And this won't be as long as the last one, much to your relief, I'm sure. I don't know how many copies. I think about maybe 8 or 9 different copies of Captain Fantastic on CD. Let's have a look at them. Beginning with this one, which is, I believe, the earliest issue that's out there. This is the 1984 German DJM copy. By the mid-80s, DJM had product manufactured in the UK, but also the label had offices in Germany, and they manufactured things in Germany. And this, I think with Captain Fantastic, there may have been British copies and a separate UK catalog number, but the German DJM copy was 8217462, and it is the earliest digital copy of Captain Fantastic that I know of. And it was mastered by Polygram in Germany. And this copy actually claims to have been pressed in the UK, not Germany, even though it's West German DJM, the label. Discogs, however, claims that these West German DJM copies on CD were actually pressed in the UK in 1985. But I suspect it's a copy actually more accurately from the early 90s. It even has that slight bronzing to it, which would suggest maybe early 90s PDO UK. So I don't know, that's a mystery that needs to be solved. As far as sound quality goes, because I don't have too many of these CDs to go through, I'm just going to kind of go through all of them, and at the very end I'll sort of summarize what I think the best versions are. I want to also add that the booklet, okay, you get full artwork. It's not unusual, but considering what came afterwards in the world of Elton John CDs, the reissues of the classic 70s albums, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so the next one is the 1986 Japan for US MCA. This is the earliest MCA-CD edition, SACD-CD. And when I say Japan for US MCA, what I mean is it was meant for the American market, but there were very few CD pressing plants in North America in 1986. And so US MCA had its CDs pressed in Japan. And JVC Japan did a lot of USMCA's stock at this time. Now, I don't know what engineer specifically did the mastering for this. What the tape sources were, I don't know. But we'll come back to this. As far as artwork goes, bit of a step down. It's just a booklet that opens, and you get a little bit of the original artwork. They're using that, I think the typeface or the font is called Coronet. But that's, as far as original artwork, that's all you get. I don't know if I showed the back, but the back is sort of a dark pink to light pink gradient. And that's the MCA copy, the earliest MCA copy. The next copy in my collection is another MCA copy. It's a 1988 MCA plaidback reissue, so it looks much the same. But you'll notice that little thing in the corner there says compact disc, compact price. MCA took Elton's classic albums line, and classic albums done by other artists too, including Olivia Newton-John, a lot of other artists that were on MCA in the 70s, and reissued a lot of their classic catalogs as part of this budget line where you got, it's called plaidback because of the stripes and everything. To some people, I didn't come up with that name, to some people this looks like a kind of plaid. Others would say it looks more like bathroom tile, but that's why they're called plaidback or bathroom tile reissues. This is actually a Canadian copy, not a US MCA copy. It's a Canadian MCA copy. This Canadian MCA plaidback is a clone of the American MCA plaidback. Looks exactly the same, but this Canadian copy was pressed by Cinram. But Cinram, as it did so often with titles in this MCA budget series, although it's not clear why Cinram did it, Cinram would clone the American copies, which in the case of Captain Fantastic, the American MCA edition of this still used the 1986 JVC Japan mastering. But Cinram would apply a very slight level shift. I don't know why, and it did that for nearly all the Elton John titles in the plaidback series. So when you run American MCA CD copies versus Canadian MCA CD copies of Captain Fantastic through a program like EAC, in most cases, the peak levels will show as different, but it's just a level shift. It's not a remaster. It is a clone of the 1986 JVC Japan for US mastering. Okay, next is the 1992 US Polydor catalog number 821746-2. This copy manufactured by US Polygram. This is the first North American CD issue of the Captain Fantastic album with full artwork. This one has a custom back, okay, but its booklet is exactly like the 1984 West German DJM booklet. And mastering-wise, many, though not all, but many of these 1992 North American Polydor CD reissues of Elton's Classic Years albums were based on the West German DJM CDs of the mid-1980s, which had been mastered by Polygram in Germany. But I'm not sure if these Polydor copies are direct clones in those cases, because when you run, for example, when you run a 1984 West German DJM copy versus a 1992 US Polydor copy of Captain Fantastic through a program like EAC, the peak levels will show as the same. So to a lot of collectors that use these kinds of programs to kind of examine or test or analyze the mastering and trace the lineage of different digital masterings, it's going to look as though it's a direct clone. It's exactly the same. The peak levels are the same. However, when you run a sample track through a spectral analysis application, like in my case I use, the one that I use is called Spec, you can see that the masterings are identical, but only to a certain point. The Polydor copy from 1992 shows significant roll-off in the highest frequencies. Now, those are frequencies I don't think the human ear can hear anyway. I can't hear any difference when I A-B compare the two discs. I can't hear any difference at all. And again, the EAC peak levels show as identical, and yet there is this difference when you compare them through a spectrogram analysis. So I don't want to say that this 1992 Polydor CD is a direct clone of the 1984 West German CD. It was clearly based on the same mastering, and the mastering, again, sounds identical to my ears anyway, but obviously there's some sonic difference between the two discs. And I've never tested West German DJM versus a Polydor in any other with any other Elton John album, but at some later point I should probably, and that might make an interesting episode. Okay, not too many copies left. Next one is the 1995 US Rocket, or well, actually distributed by Island, Classic Years Remaster, catalog number 314-528-160-2. So these were marketed widely as remasters. Gus Dudgeon is often credited with doing the remastering work for this 1995-96 Classic Years Remaster series, but I think he only supervised it. The actual remastering work was by Tony Cousins, and Tony Cousins did that work at Metropolis, UK. Now, this version was the first version of Captain Fantastic on any format, but certainly the first CD version to have bonus tracks. It comes with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, One Day at a Time, and Philly Freedom, all three of which I think were recorded at Caribou Studios in late 1974. This copy is a later copy. It's definitely post-2000, after Universal Music Group formed. It was manufactured in the US by Universal, but the mastering on here is the same as the earlier 1995 Classic Years remaster copies. Next is the 2004, it's in one of those Super Jewel cases, the 2004 US SACD 5.1 Surround Edition. So remixed in discrete 5.1 surround by Greg Penny. And I said SACD, but these were SACD /CD hybrids, which means that although it's primarily an SACD, there is a CD layer that will play the original stereo mix if you don't have a machine that will play SACDs. I remember when I bought these, I didn't actually have an SACD player or any kind of optical disc player that could play discrete 5.1, and I foolishly thought, oh well, the new mixes will just down mix to stereo. No. No, if you put this in a conventional CD player, it will play the original 1975 stereo mix. But there's been some debate and disagreement over the years about whether the CD layer on these 2004 Elton John SACD reissues, whether the CD layer is just a dupe of the 1995 remaster by Tony Cousins, or if Greg Penny, who did the mastering for the SACD 5.1 layer, if Greg Penny remastered the stereo version 2. And I don't know the answer to that. I've never bothered to test the CD layer in EAC or anything like that, so I don't know. I will say that the 5.1 remix is unbelievably cool. I love this. That line of Elton John classic years albums remixed in 5.1 surround, there were 6 of them. They were all remixed by Greg Penny and issued on SACD. I think the original bunch was Yellow Brick Road was done first and released in October 2003, and then in early 2004, self-titled Elton John, Tumbleweed Connection, Madman, and Honky Chateau, and this one. Those were released. So that does that make 6? I'm terrible at math. Yeah, it does. In 2005, Don't Shoot Me, Caribou, Rock of the Westies, and Blue Moons were supposed to be sort of the phase 2. And it's not that Greg Penny didn't do them. He did. He remixed those albums. They were sitting there ready to go to the factory to be turned into physical format SACD copies, and it's a story we'll get into another time, but Universal canceled its SACD programs, and so those last 4 never got released. It's too bad. I'm telling you all this because this is the only Elton John album after Goodbye Yellow Brick Road of those classic years albums that got a release. Yellow Brick Road was done at the Chateau, not Chateau, Chateau, and so it was 16 track. Everything from Caribou afterward was done 24 track or more. My point is, when you make a 5.1 mix from a 24 track multi-track session tape, but you have more to choose from, you have more options than when you're doing something from 8 track or a 16 track multi-track tape. And really, as if you for some reason have some of the earlier Elton albums done in 5.1 surround, but you don't have Captain Fantastic, pay what you got to pay to get this. This is just a really, really cool way to experience this album, and it's SACD and mastered in DSD, so the sound quality wise, it's really, really great. Second last one, this is the 2005 US Rocket and distributed by Island Records 30th anniversary 2 CD deluxe edition. And there's the back. And so what you get on disc 1 is you get the original album with bonus tracks, including this time around House of Cards, which is actually an outtake from the Caribou sessions, but for some reason it was shoved on here. And on disc 2, you get, I believe, the full performance, or nearly the full performance, from that summer 1975 Wembley Stadium show that Elton did with his newly formed Westies band. So by this point, Olsen and Murray had been dismissed. And so that was a legendary show, but it was recorded and made available for the first time legitimately as disc 2 of this 30th anniversary deluxe 2 CD version of the Captain Fantastic album. And disc 1 was just a clone of the 1995 Tony Cousins classic years remaster, but disc 2 was mastered by Greg Penny. And on a personal note, Sam the Record Man was a pretty big music store in Toronto, and I was living in Toronto at the time this came out. I didn't know it at the time, but this turned out to be the last anything that I ever bought at Sam the Record Man. It closed not quite 2 years later. And this is really cool because it's a digipack, okay? Then it opens like this and opens like that. So already you can see the digipack design reproduces some of the original scrapbook, the articles and the photographs. I remember opening this on the Toronto subway and I was not prepared for this. You get a booklet, okay? It's a standard CD booklet, which has historical liner notes, etc., etc. But you also get the little facsimile of the poster. I guess actually I might as well open this. I didn't open any of the vinyl copy posters because they're just so big. Even the MCA ones, which were smaller, are just too big to open on camera. But here's a little mini facsimile repro of the poster, which is cute. And then you get these two little mini repros of the scrapbook and the lyric book. And I did not know that this edition was going to have those. I was on the subway going back to my apartment in Toronto. And I took the shrink off this, and then these booklets fell on the floor of the subway car I was in. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm freaking out. I remember people were staring at me, watching me pick these little things up off the floor, and they probably thought I was crazy. But I was just so jazzed by that. That was so cool that they made those little booklets. These slip cases are such a pain in the ass. There we go. Okay. All right, so last but certainly not least, the 2019 Japanese Mercury SHM-CD paper sleeve edition, catalog number UICY78964, and manufactured by Universal Japan. I said SHM-CD, okay, I think I explained in an earlier episode how those SHM-CDs differ from standard CDs. I don't actually believe they're any better, but some people do. You can look it up online or find that earlier episode if you want. But the real treat is the new mastering. There were earlier SHM-CD reissues of these classic Elton John albums earlier the same decade, and also done by Universal Japan. Make sure you get the catalog number correct, and you want paper sleeve edition 2019. Okay, the sleeve. Should I take it out? Yeah, what the heck. I don't usually like taking these out. You'll notice that I'll get the Japanese. So hold on. Not only is this paper sleeve a repro of the original vinyl album cover, but it's a repro too of the original Japanese obi. So that's neat. I'll leave the obi strip in there. So that's what the little mini LP cover looks like, and it opens up just like the LP did. You have the gatefold, and the CD is supposed to be in here. There is a little sleeve for it. I keep the CD actually separate. I don't like putting CDs in paper card sleeves because it just scratches them. And these were not cheap. These SHM-CD editions from Universal Japan are not cheap. But this one, like the 2005 Deluxe 2CD version, this one comes with little mini booklets and a mini replica of the poster and everything. They're more or less the same. But that's part of the charm of these 2019 editions, is that they reproduce in miniature the original album experience, which is cool. So just some more information about this edition of Captain Fantastic. Contrary to popular belief, although these SHM CDs were new digital masterings, they were not flat transfers. And I think one reason why the rumor began that they were flat transfers was because from 89 to 93, Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, they released Ultradisc CD audiophile editions of several Elton John albums. I think 4 of them. And in 3 of the 4 cases, those were flat transfers. So when you play those Ultradisc audiophile editions, you're here, except for I think Honky Chateau was tweaked a little bit, but Yellow Brick Road, Tumbleweed, and Madman Across the Water, you're hearing what the original master tapes sounded like in the late 80s, early 90s, which is cool. But I'm mention that because I think that's where the rumor began that these were flat transfers. They weren't, okay? These 2019 Japanese SHM CDs were remastered by Universal Japan using high-res digital copies of flat transfers made years back, using those as a basis, but they were EQ'd. Okay, so I said that I'd talk about sound quality at the very end. Generally speaking, none of these sounds particularly bad. There's no one copy that I'd warn you away from. But excluding the 2004 SACD, which sounds amazing, but I don't include it in my analysis of preferred CD masterings because SACD is different. It's not really a fair comparison, so I'm not going to include that, although believe me, it sounds really, really fantastic. But when it comes to just conventional CDs, in first place, for me, is the 1986 JVC Japan for US mastering, okay, with the pink back, which is, you don't have to get this exact copy. You can get the MCA plaid back. It's the exact same mastering. Basically, any MCA CD copy of Captain Fantastic will have, including the Canadian copies, will have that mastering. I find it has the right EQ in all the right places, particularly the mid-range, which is just golden. I just love that mastering. In second place is the 1984 West German DJM copy with mastering by Polygram, which you can get on the 1980s West German DJM-CD copies. Or if you want, you can just get, if you're here in North America, just look for a copy of the 1992 Polydor. So that's second place. In at a very close third, in fact, probably tied for second place, actually, is the 2019 Japanese SHM-CD edition. That just, the mastering on this is really, really great. So those are my top three. Again, the others, it's not that they're bad. Those are my top three preferred masterings. Okay, fantastic. So I went through all these pretty quickly, but down the line, I plan to cover CDs in more detail on this channel, and when I do, I can talk a bit more about these different CD series, like the DJM UK versus the DJM West German line versus the DJM Japan CDs of these classic Elton albums, the MCA copies versus the Polydors versus the Rocket remasters, that sort of thing. I can do sort of a more general kind of compare and contrast of those different series. But for now, thanks for watching. Once again, happy 50th anniversary to Captain Fantastic and the Brown Deer Cowboy. Just a wonderful album. Remember to click like on this video and consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching.